many, it is one of the more worrisome civic issues in America, the growing distrust of elections in this country. Recently, the Secretary of State's office launched a new effort to try to restore public confidence in New Hampshire elections. Here this morning to discuss that effort is the Secretary of State himself, Mr. David Scanlon. Thank you so much for joining us, Secretary.
My pleasure. Good morning, Adam.
So in some ways, this is not a new effort for you. You've been doing this kind of stuff for a long time. I think back to the exhaustive investigation that was done of the 2016 election. You guys came out in 2018 and talked a lot about, looking into the allegations of buses from Massachusetts. Turned out they were rentals that were bringing New Hampshire voters to New Hampshire polls. Talked about how ballots can't be hacked, pencils can't be hacked in a paper ballot system. We reported on this extensively. Other outlets did as well. The information is out there, the facts were there, and yet there's still this disconnect. The distrust continues. So where do you think that short circuit is happening in the system?
Well, first of all, I believe that New Hampshire runs elections as well as, if not better than, any other state in the country. But there is this growing trend. It started nationally about a lack of confidence, a lack that an individual voter's vote is actually being properly counted in an election, and that's due to a number of factors. But the rhetoric that is now taking place at the national level is impacting New Hampshire, and we are starting to see that rhetoric influence how people view elections here in the state. From my perspective, I believe it's an education issue primarily. New Hampshire's elections are sound for a number of reasons. One is that there are a number of checks and balances that are built into the system. Our local election officials are elected. We have individuals in the polling place that are appointed by the parties. Those are the inspectors of election, also known as ballot clerks. There can be official challengers in the polling place, and any voter, anyone who's interested, can show up in a polling place and watch the process start to finish. Transparency is another big issue, and we are encouraging local election officials to be more transparent in how they operate. And if voters have questions about what's going on, help educate the voter on just exactly what is happening in the polling place so there is no mystery. Part of the problem comes in those areas where voters can't actually see what is happening. So you hear a lot about voting machines and whether they're properly programmed or whether they can be hacked through the internet and things like that. And we have plenty of safeguards in place to protect ourselves, but we have to do a better job on just showing people how those processes work. Another area is absentee balloting. That is a process that is done usually in a person's home. There are some checks and balances in place, but those checks and balances have actually been weakened through some court actions where local election officials cannot compare signatures of the voter on their application versus their registration form, and those things cause issues.
I've noticed you've emphasized, as this commission has kind of got up and running, the decentralized nature of New Hampshire elections. How important is that, in your view, to emphasize to voters that there is no sort of puppet master behind elections, that all of the state's towns and precincts essentially run themselves and aren't controlled by you, per se?
That's exactly right, and that's a very important component in our process, in that New Hampshire literally elects thousands of local election officials, and those individuals are your neighbors. Chances are good that you know at least one, if not all, of the individuals that are conducting elections locally, and hopefully those people are elected because of their integrity and their honesty and their ability to do the job. We prepare the ballots and we oversee the operation. We distribute them to the towns, but it's actually those local election officials that run the election, and they also maintain the voter checklist. The locally elected supervisors of the checklist are the only individuals that are authorized to put names on a checklist or take names off of a checklist. So it's a real community effort. That's a strong point. It's also a weakness in that there's a lot of turnover in those positions, and elections are becoming more complex in how they're conducted. And so there's a constant education effort. And for that reason, elections are not perfect. There's a human function. There's human error that's involved, and we see that in situations like what occurred in Windham and how ballots were not folded properly, and that caused problems. And there are addition errors that are sometimes made when votes are being tallied and things like that. But in the end, we have a process where we have more recounts probably than any other state in the country. The legislature is asking us to undertake post-election audits to just confirm the results. And hopefully those actions will strengthen the process and the confidence that voters have.
You said this new commission is there primarily to listen, and it's not going to be the commission's job to set people straight or to cast judgment or to say, hey, that's misinformation or disinformation. You can't say that. But what is the limit of your tolerance for these conspiracy theories and some of these almost fantastical things that we've heard said at the State House in the last few months? I think back to one hearing where someone was alleging that, the ballot counting machines were rigged as far back as the 1988 presidential primary against Bob Dole, the kind of stuff that just strains credulity.
We are faced with a lot of misinformation and outright disinformation that is more readily available today than it was even 10 years ago with the availability of social media and the ability for mass communication by individuals. It's unfortunate that some of these individuals are conveying incorrect information, and they know it, to prove a point or to push a certain cause. And those individuals are limited, but they do have a big impact. And we have to figure out ways to counter that. And I believe this commission, the committee that I've created to have this discussion is for that purpose. Have a discussion. Let's get the facts out there. It's an opportunity to educate. And I think if the voters actually take the time to understand how our process works, it's simple, it's transparent, and it's observable from start to finish, that will go a long way to help rebuilding that confidence that we need to have in our elections.
Right, and you've included a diversity of viewpoints on this commission. Some have questioned why you have someone on there who won't say whether he believes Joe Biden won the 2020 election. Why did you include someone like that?
Well, you can't have a diverse group and then start to complain about who's participating. I think that committee has a broad spectrum of individuals with differing viewpoints, but they all have the ability to listen, and that includes the individual that some people have complained about. Every member of that committee I have been able to have a intelligent conversation with, and there's listening and conveying of ideas. And if I didn't think that the individuals on that committee could not view this process objectively, they wouldn't be on there.
One other question about the makeup of the commission. Others have criticized that there's no racial diversity on the commission, and certainly that's a voter hesitancy issue that's out there. Certain communities, new American citizens, have the right to vote, but they might be hesitant sometimes because they're not as familiar with the process. Why not include someone from that community?
I actually asked some individuals of color to participate, and they declined. We do have the issue that, and I really acknowledge that New Hampshire is a predominantly a white state, and finding somebody that is ethnically diverse is not as easy as. And the other thing is, I don't want to have somebody feel like they're a token, from a certain community just because that's politically correct. I think that the individuals that are currently serving, can look beyond, their own ethnicity and consider all the issues that are out there. I will also say that I intentionally did not appoint any elected officials, either at the state level or the local level because I didn't want the committee to look self-serving in that way.
As we wrap up here, one quick question about the First in the Nation primary. How worried are you about this new democratic process that essentially will have the DNC reorder and has this application now where New Hampshire has to ask permission essentially to go first?
Well, New Hampshire has a law that says that we will go at least 1 week before any similar event, and it's my job as Secretary of State to make sure that we follow through on that. I know that there are other states that are envious of our position. You know, I think it is of concern that the National Democratic Party is kind of taking the lead on this. I don't think it's a good idea to participate in the process of asking for permission. Because it sets a precedent, number one, for future primaries. You know, I think New Hampshire should just stick to its law and its tradition and move forward.
Yeah, we'll see how that all plays out. Important to note the Republicans have said New Hampshire is first still, so
yes.
Only on one side at the time. So, right. Secretary David Scanlon, we thank you for your time, and we'll keep an eye on this commission.
Thank you.